Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Uber Cordero Show for this week. And this week we talk about something really interesting. I want to give a commentary, if it's possible, for the African continent to unite. And I want to talk about this in lieu of what's happening in recent times. Well, if you're after the news and you don't know a little bit about what is going on, I want to update you on last year, around the same time, Kenyan people elected a new president. His name is William Ruto, actually, Dr. William Ruto. And he's the first president in Kenya who was born after independence in 1964. He's also the first president who has come out of a family that's not affiliated at all with the independence struggle in Kenya. So he's a new brand. And one of the things that Ruto has been committed to doing is going around the continent talking about African unity and being aggressive on ways in which the African continent can come together and generate a voice that can be taken seriously internationally. And this is why I want to talk about this. I think because those things that Ruto is campaigning for are necessary. And the sides that Ruto have are genuine. And I don't doubt that. But it's also something that has been said over and over since 1960s when a majority of African countries got independence. Why has it been impossible? And I'll give you three reasons. One, first I want to talk about why Ruto's position is generating excitement, but I call it empty excitement. One, Ruto has called out the practice of African leaders going into meetings in Washington, D.C., in Moscow, in Beijing, as a collective, 50 people, hardly getting enough time to talk, usually getting about 3 minutes, and being treated like sheep or being hoarded in buses. Ruto hates this. In addition to that, in exchange for that, he recommends that the African Union be given power, the Secretariat be given power to represent the continent. But here, the problem with that is the African Union is not made to do that. It's sort of like the powers that it have been delegated by the state. And the states have not been unified enough to have a central position, central policy. And therefore, each of these countries, while going into the meeting in the UN, in Washington, D.C., in London, in Beijing, in Berlin, Germany, they go for themselves. So there is no collective voice from the African continent that represents them. If you're not adding the differences in policy, West Africa is very different from East Africa, not so much with South Africa. So there's no collective approach. But the only uniting factor about the African continent is its position of isolation in international affairs. Although that doesn't mean that they're not important. International relations happens in Africa, happens on Africa, but doesn't involve a lot of African actors on the part of policy. So the agitation for integration of the African continent comes from the desire of a continent of about 1.3 billion people to have a voice internationally. And some of these countries in the continent are going to be crucial players in the next 20 years on international affairs. Nigeria, for example, is estimated by 2040, 2050, it's going to be having the same population as the United States, as Indonesia, giving them a lot of power and as well as soft power if you go by their music and their films and sports internationally. If they can translate that energy into concrete policy, it's going to be a power to be reckoned with. Now, here are the three things why a united African position is still kind of hard to find. One is just the interest of different countries that are kind of tied to their colonial powers, that kind of strangling them on the neck on what they can do with these supposedly independent states. It's more pronounced in the French-speaking countries than in some of the English-speaking countries. But the general consensus is that there is political independence, but it's limited international relations independence. There's also limited international political economy independence. So many of these countries cannot fully write their own policy advocate for them without stepping on the foot on treaties that were signed during colonial rule, limiting integration. Number two is that the political elites do the talk. They talk a lot about integration, but they do not want it. So Ruto also really do not want it. President Ruto will not lie if Ramaphosa will take his place and speak for Africa. He will not like if Al-Sisi of Egypt will speak for him. Each of them are egoists. They are very protective of their power, and they will not like to delegate it. They will not like somebody to, they're not governors. They see themselves as heads of state, and therefore they would not like to federalize. They like it as a weak confederacy in order to gain their power, which sometimes does not even serve their people. Number three, the reason why it will be impossible to integrate Africa fully is infrastructural problem. There is a massive infrastructural deficit in the continent that China is helping with correcting, but it's costing a lot of money and is slowly leading these countries into debt. But they're getting the infrastructure, but still a long way. A country like Congo has no connecting highway from the eastern city of Goma to the capital in Kinshasa. If you fly, you have to fly from Goma to get into Kinshasa, about the size of Western Europe. There's no roads there. There's no railway that connects those places. So Congo is in Kinshasa is different. It's almost has a West African vibe. Goma on the east, on the other side, is very different. It has an East African vibe, and the people there look like East Africans. You see that difference all over Africa. The sheer size of the continent and geography of it and the historical legacies have made it almost impossible for connecting infrastructures to facilitate a united identity that then can facilitate continental integration. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of conscious investment and intentional targeting for the continent to be united. So I'm hopeful, but I'm going to remind you again, the positions of political elites and their talk is not new. Every politician come in hungry for attention and with new ideas, but they get eaten up with the reality of governance. And therefore, my warning to President Ruto is, give us a pragmatic policy and take the leadership and encourage fast unity in the East African community by collapsing some of these small states into a much more intentional union at the community level before we talk about continental integration. Thank you very much and have a good day. Please join me again on the conversation about this on the comments, share this video and subscribe and like. Looking forward to talking to you next time. Bye-bye.